Right, shalom everyone. Truth in the Word here, bringing another video today. I hope everyone's doing well. We have just, come off the feast days and Shabbat, and we had a blast. Really enjoyed it. If you observed the feast, and we hope you had a good time as well. And it's always comforting to show up and meet Yah at His times, and we love doing it. And we had our whole little get together at the church, and had a good bit of people show up. It was great, and we ate lots of tortillas, and the wife made some homemade flatbread that was delicious. But anyway, that's not why we're here today. We're here today to talk about our brother Paul here, and we're asking the question: did Paul really mean no one can judge us for not keeping the Father's feast and diet? All right, let's see. All right, so first, what we want to look at here is, should the word contain contradictions? Uh, if we look at 1 Corinthians 14, verse 33, we see, for Elohim is not Elohim of disorder, but of peace, as in all the assemblies of the set apart ones. Psalms 119, verse 160 says, the sum of your word is truth, and all your righteous right rulings are forever. Now, I just picked a couple verses here. There's a ton. Uh, you know, the word's true, and I wouldn't think having contradictions is considered, be of peace. Excuse me. Every time I try to make a video, my throat wants to get scratchy. Maybe Hasatan trying to shut me down. Oh, excuse me. All right, so there are many verses that claim the truth and validity of the word. I think it would be reasonable to think, if two things contradict each other, then we should really step back and try to figure out what we're missing. All right, so here's the verse we're looking at today, Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 and 17. Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. All right, so popular theology today says that these verses mean that we shouldn't let the Torah keepers in Colossae judge them for not keeping the laws, the feast days, and the new moons. Whew, get behind me, Satan. All right, and here's one of the big places that modern theology comes from, the Moody Bible Commentary. I'm pretty sure most of you guys are familiar with Moody. I'm not putting them down here. I think they dropped the ball with this. First, the Colossians are to be on guard against someone who requires that they obey Old Testament law, such as the food, the drink, and the Sabbath. The whole law, as a mere shadow, looked forward to Christ and to what was to come. He is the substance, the real thing that casts the shadow. We look to him. He alone is our judge. And that's where you can find that there. All right, creating contradictions. Sometimes our interpretations can do that. when we are so narrow focused, we make big picture contradictions. This interpretation creates a few contradictions, though if we walk it out, we create contradictions with Paul's walk, with Paul's other letters, and even with Messiah. So let's take a look at Paul and see if this idea matches what Paul wrote and what he teaches and how he lived his life. All right, so what kind of life does Paul lead? Paul claims that he imitates Christ and teaches to imitate him. Given that, we should expect to be able to look at Christ and expect to see Paul doing and teaching the same things our Messiah did. 1 Corinthians 4:16 says, I urge you, then, be imitators of me. 1 Corinthians 11, chapter 1, says, be imitators of me as I am an imitator of Christ. All right, so we're going to look at that. What did Christ do? All right, well, number one, he kept the feast days. You see in Luke 2:41 and 42, says, now his parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover, and when he was 12 years old, they went up according to custom. Matthew 26, chapter 17, verse 17 and 18. Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying, where will you have us prepare for you to eat the Passover? He said, go into the city to a certain man and say to him, the teacher says, my time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at your house with my disciples. All right, so Christ kept the feast days. More of this. Now, John 2, verse 23 says, now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. John chapter 5, verse 1. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. John chapter 7, verse 37. On the last day of the feast, the great day, Jesus stood up and cried out, if anyone thirst, let him come to me and drink. John chapter 6, verse 4 and 5. Now the Passover, the feast of the Jews, was at hand. Lifting up his eyes then, and seeing that a large crowd was coming toward him, Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy bread so that these people may eat? John chapter 7, verse 10. But after his brothers had gone up to the feast, then he also went up, not publicly, but in private. John chapter 7, verse 14 says, about the middle of the feast, Jesus went up to the temple and began teaching. All right, so Jesus wore tzitzits. So Numbers 15:37, and which I didn't have room. You can go all the way to 41 or whatever to the end there. But just to catch the command here, we got Numbers 15:37, 38. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them to make tzitzit on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a blue cord in the tzitzit of the corners. All right, so jump over here to Matthew chapter 9, verse 20. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. That's Jesus's tzitzit. Word study that. All right, Jesus also kept the seventh day Sabbath. Mark chapter 2, verse 27. And he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. I'm a man. See, Luke chapter 4, verse 16. And he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, as was his custom, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, and he stood up to read. Matthew chapter 12, verse 9 and 10. He went on from there and entered their synagogue. And a man was there with a withered hand, and they asked him, Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So that they might accuse him. All right, Luke chapter 13, verse 10. Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath. Mark chapter 1, verse 21. And they went into Capernaum, and immediately on the Sabbath he entered the synagogue and was teaching. All right, Jesus obeyed the Father and taught obedience to the Father. Philippians chapter 2, verse 8. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Hebrews chapter 5, verse 8. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. John chapter 8, verse 28. Jesus said to them, When you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own authority, but speak just as the Father taught me. Luke chapter 22, verse 42, saying, Father, if you are willing, remove this cup from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. John chapter 5, verse 30, I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 22, he committed no sin, neither was deceit found in his mouth. As we've seen in our other videos, what is this sin right here, right? Transgression of the law, the Father's law, that Yeshua obeyed perfectly. 1 John chapter 3, verse 5, you know that he appeared in order to take away sins, and in him there is no sin. He obeyed the Torah perfectly. He also clarified that he didn't abolish the Torah. Matthew chapter 5, verse 17 and 18. Do not think that I have come to abolish, get rid of, the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, aka get rid of them, but to fulfill them. And fulfill does not mean get rid of. And for truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished. Jesus dying on the cross was not all that there's to be accomplished, right? If it is, we missed the boat, because he's supposed to be preparing a place for us and coming back to get us, right? It ain't all accomplished yet. And you got the sun and the moon there. Why is that in this verse? Well, what did Yah call for a witness when he gave the law? Huh? Go down a rabbit trail. I just tossed you one. Right. So Paul's imitation of Christ. So now that we see the model that Christ gave us, we would expect Paul to be doing and teaching the same thing, since he said he imitated Christ. All right, so, but to say that Paul instructs the Colossians in chapter 2, verse 16 and 17, not to let anyone judge them on keeping those laws, is a direct, or that should be not keeping those laws. It should be a direct contradiction with Paul instructing to keep and how to keep Passover. It also contradicts Paul declaring that he imitates Jesus. All right, so we got Paul versus Paul, right? Therefore, let no one pass judgment on you in questions of food and drink, or with regard to a festival, or a new moon, or a Sabbath. These are a shadow of the things to come, but the substance belongs to Christ. Right? But here we got Paul again saying, 1 Corinthians 5, 7, and 8, cleanse out the old leaven that you may be a new lump, as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Let us therefore celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven, the leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. So, contradiction. Paul says, don't keep. Paul says, do keep. Right? Maybe we're missing something here. Oh, Paul versus Pal. All right. Another edit I got to go make. All right. So this interpretation also presents a contradiction with Paul instructing that we should judge other believers based on whether or not they are obeying God's laws. Right? Paul versus Paul. You know, this one, food, drink, nobody can judge you, right? But we go to 1 Corinthians 5, chapter 11 through 13. But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he is guilty of sexual immorality or greed, or is an idolater, reviler, drunkard, or swindler, not even to eat with such a one. For what have I to do with judging outsiders? Is it not those inside the church whom you are to judge? God judges those outside. Purge the evil person from among you. So, don't do the things. Do the things, right? And if you didn't catch that, it just, all this list here, these are sins that are outlined in the Torah that we shouldn't do. That's what he's pulling this from, right? These are law breakings. And he said, don't hang out with these lawbreakers. It's kind of different from not judging you for not doing these. I guess these people ain't going to ever hang out with these people. Non-contradictory interpretation. Question mark, question mark. Is there a way we can understand Colossians chapter 2, verse 16 through 17 without a contradiction? Yes, it just so happens there is. So, what Paul means in these verses is that we aren't going to let the unbelievers who are 800 miles away from the center of the people who follow Yah, is pagan country, right? We're not going to let those guys judge us for keeping Yah's days and Yah's ways. He is telling new believers not to let them judge them for keeping God's ways. This doesn't offer any contradictions at all. This interpretation lines up with Paul's life, his other writings, Christ's life, and his declaration that he imitates Christ. All right, so let's look at Paul imitating Christ. He kept the feast of unleavened bread in Acts chapter 20, verse 6. But we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and in 5 days we came to them at Troas, where we stayed for 7 days. He kept Pentecost. Acts chapter 20, verse 16. For Paul had decided to sail past Ephesus, so that so that he might not have to spend time in Asia, for he was hastening to be at Jerusalem, if possible, on the day of Pentecost. He kept the Passover. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7 through 8. Cleanse out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Let us therefore celebrate the festival, right? We just read that one. All right, so we got some more contradictions with the other way. We got Paul versus the Jerusalem Council. The wrong interpretation also creates contradiction with the Jerusalem Council. If Paul says that no one can judge you on what you eat or drink, why would he agree and decide with Peter, James, and the other leaders that the new believers couldn't drink blood? Right? Colossians, right? We've read that one. Don't let nobody judge you for not doing this, right? Acts chapter 15, verse 20. But should write to them to abstain from the things polluted by idols, and from sexual immorality, and from what has been strangled, and from blood. Man, that sounds like Paul should be in here duking it out with the Jerusalem Council, right? Paul said, you can't judge me on food, right? And drink. If I want to drink blood, I should be able to, right? Festival, right? Sexual immorality. I'm sure they considered those temple orgies to be some kind of festival, right? We can do whatever festival we want, right? Sounds good to me, huh? So, what is happening here is you have the Colossians, who are far away from the people that practice God's ways. The new believers were starting to follow God's ways, and the people that were pagan influenced were scoffing at them for keeping their new weird ways, right? If you're watching this channel, there's a good chance maybe you keep Torah too. And, how's your family and community view that for the most part, right? We're doing these weird things, right? Like not drinking blood, for example, right? The surrounding people there drank blood. So when you become, to God here, you accept Christ and you're following God's ways, you're not drinking the blood anymore. So the blood drinkers are the ones who are going to be judging you for not drinking the blood, right? They have become a peculiar people, right? I should be ringing some scripture bells to their surrounding neighbors. Yah calls his people to be peculiar people. How do we be peculiar people? We follow his ways, right? So, Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 2, for thou art a holy people to the Lord thy God, and the Lord has chosen thee to be a peculiar people unto himself, above all the nations that are upon the earth. Deuteronomy 26:18, and the Lord hath avouched thee this day to be his peculiar people, as he hath promised thee, and that thou shouldest keep all his commandments. Psalms 135, verse 4. For the Lord hath chosen Jacob unto himself, and Israel for his peculiar treasure. Right, so in conclusion, we have to remember that Yah isn't the author of confusion. If we read Paul as teaching anti-law, then we cause contradictions between all of God's word, all of Jesus' actions and words, and we even have Paul contradicting himself in his own writings. Paul obeyed the law, Paul taught the law, Paul imitated Christ, who also did and taught the same. If we read Paul as anti-law, we err on the side of lawlessness. Go back and watch my Tell of Two Teams video. And we know what Christ has to say about lawlessness. So here's Peter's warning, 2 Peter 3:15 through 17. And count the patience of our Lord as salvation, just as our beloved brother Paul also wrote to you according to the wisdom given him, as he does in all his letters when he speaks in them of these matters. There are some things in them that are hard to understand, which the ignorant and the unstable twist to their own destruction. That doesn't sound like they're getting everlasting life, as they do the other scriptures. You therefore, me, therefore, beloved, knowing this beforehand, take care that you are not carried away with the error of lawless people and lose your own stability. Right? Paul's not teaching against the law. He's hard to understand sometimes. And it's like I've said before, don't let a couple verses that are hard to understand cause you to throw out 80% of the rest of the Bible. Right? Matthew chapter 7, verse 22 and 23. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name and cast out demons in your name and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. Right, guys? We don't want to be on team lawlessness. We want to be on team righteousness. Our brother Paul was on team righteousness. We've covered things he done. We've covered other places where he taught, a direct contradiction to common interpretation for this verse. It's we got to look at the big picture, and we got to look at the other stuff. Confusion is contradiction, right? That's not what's wrote in here. We just got to dig deep and obey his commandments. But all right, guys, I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching the video. Like, share, do all the good YouTube stuff. Help me get out there. I want to grow the channel some more. Maybe we can reach some more people. And comment. Let me know what you think. Like I said, it's okay to disagree. Just disagree in love. We're all brothers and sisters in Yeshua, our Mashiach. And, let's act that way in our disagreements as well. But, my personal opinion is, it's kind of hard to disagree with some of this, but it do be like that sometimes. But anyway, have a good day, evening, night, wherever and whenever you watch this. And until the next time, shalom.